Hello, my fellow weirdlings. It's Margot, and today I'm bringing you some theories about the mysterious death of Edgar Allan Poe, which rivals anything dreamed up by Poe himself, one of the greatest horror writers of all time. If you're ready to get spooked and spine-tingled and learn more about our gothic godfather, keep watching. On October 3, 1849, a typesetter for the Baltimore Sun named Joseph W. Walker was on his way to vote and came upon a man, delirious and dressed in shabby, second-hand, ill-fitting clothing, lying in the gutter near Gunner's Hall, a temporary polling place in Baltimore, Maryland. The man was semi-conscious and unable to move. Walker was shocked to recognize the man as author, inventor of the detective mystery genre, and master of the macabre, Edgar Allan Poe. When asked if he had any acquaintances who may be able to help him, Poe was only able to give Walker a name, Joseph E. Snodgrass, who was a magazine editor with medical training. Poe spent 4 days in the hospital in fits of delirium and hallucinations until his death on October 7th, at the age of 40. During this time, only hospital staff were allowed to see him. Poe's cousin, Nielsen Poe, was even denied entry. Mr. Poe's last words were supposedly, "Lord help my poor soul." The night before his death, according to his attending physician, Poe repeatedly called out for Reynolds, a figure who to this day remains a mystery. Everything about the last week of Poe's life prior to being found on that election day remains a mystery. Prior to his discovery, Poe had been missing for 6 days. Nobody knows what occurred during this time that led to his death, seemingly ripped directly from the pages of one of his own Gothic works. On September 27th, Poe had left Richmond, Virginia, bound for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to edit a collection of poems for Mrs. St. Leon Loud, a minor poet of the time. Poe never made it to Philadelphia to attend to his editing business, nor did he ever make it back to New York, where he had been living, to escort his aunt back to Richmond for his impending wedding. The cause of death was listed as phrenitis, or swelling of the brain, but if so, what caused it? Many theories have been proposed over the more than a century and a half since Poe's death. In commemoration of the anniversary of that date, I'd like to discuss some of those theories. In 1867, one of the first theories to deviate from either phrenitis or alcohol was published by biographer E. Oakes Smith in her article, Autobiographic Notes, Edgar Allan Poe. She asserted that Poe had been beaten by a ruffian in defense of a woman whom Poe had, in some way, injured. In an 1872 article titled The Grave of Poe, Eugene Didier theorized that while in Baltimore, Poe had run into some friends from West Point who he'd joined for drinks. Being notoriously unable to handle liquor, Poe became madly drunk after a single glass of champagne and left his friends to wander the street. Didier asserts that in his drunken state, he was robbed and beaten by ruffians and left insensible in the streets all night. Many others believe that Poe fell victim to a practice known as cooping. Cooping was a method of voter fraud practiced by gangs in the 19th century, where an unsuspecting victim would be kidnapped, disguised, and forced to vote for a specific candidate multiple times, under multiple identities. Voter fraud was extremely common in Baltimore at this time, and the polling site where Walker found the disheveled Poe was a known place that coopers brought their victims. Over the years, the cooping theory has come to be one of the more widely accepted explanations for Poe's strange set of circumstances before his death. Before Prohibition, voters were given alcohol after voting as a sort of reward. This theory claims that had Poe been forced to vote multiple times in a cooping scheme, that might explain his semi-conscious, disheveled state. Another commonly discussed culprit is Poe's dysfunctional relationship with alcohol. It's been documented that after just a glass of wine, Poe would be staggering drunk. It's said his sister had the same problem, and it was thought to be hereditary. However, months before his death, Poe became a vocal member of the temperance movement, denouncing alcohol, which he'd struggled with his whole life. Proponents of the death by alcohol theory note that not long before his death, Poe had fallen ill in Richmond, Virginia, and after making a somewhat miraculous recovery, was told by his attending physician that another such attack would prove fatal. Poe reportedly replied that if people would not tempt him, he would not fall, seemingly suggesting that the illness was brought on by a bout of drinking. Though the theory that Poe's drinking led to his death fails to explain his 5-day disappearance or the second-hand clothes he was wearing when found on October 3rd, it was nonetheless a popular theory, propagated by Snodgrass after Poe's death. A member of the temperance movement, Snodgrass gave lectures across the country, blaming Poe's death on binge drinking. However, modern science shows from samples of Poe's hair from after his death that very low levels of lead would indicate Poe had actually remained sober up until his demise. It should also be noted that Dr. John J. Moran, Poe's physician in his final days, insisted that the course of his illness did not conform with that of a deadly bout of alcohol poisoning. In 1999, public health researcher Albert Donne argued that Poe's death was a result of carbon monoxide poisoning from coal gas that was used for indoor lighting during the 19th century. Donne took clippings of Poe's hair to test for certain heavy metals that would be able to reveal the presence of coal gas, but the test was inconclusive. What Donne's test did reveal was elevated levels of mercury in Poe's system months before his death, most likely elevated as a result of a cholera epidemic he'd been exposed to in July of 1849 while in Philadelphia. Poe's doctor prescribed calomel or mercury chloride. Mercury poisoning could help explain some of Poe's hallucinations and delirium before his death. However, the levels of mercury found in Poe's hair, even at their highest, are still 30 times below the level consistent with mercury poisoning. In 1996, Dr. R. Michael Benitez was participating in a clinical pathologic conference where doctors are given the information of anonymous patients along with a list of symptoms and instructed to diagnose and compare with other doctors, as well as the written record. Dr. Benitez was assigned a patient known only as EP, a writer from Richmond, and from this information felt it was clear the patient had died from rabies. The facts of the case were that the patient, EP, had been admitted to a hospital due to lethargy and confusion. Once admitted, EP's condition began a rapid downward spiral. Shortly, the patient was exhibiting delirium, visual hallucinations, wide variations in pulse rate, and rapid shallow breathing. Within 4 days, the median length of survival after the onset of serious rabies symptoms, EP was dead. Rabies was also a fairly common virus in the 19th century. There are a couple issues with this theory, including no evidence of hydrophobia. Those afflicted with rabies develop a fear of water. Poe was reported to have been drinking water at the hospital until his death, nor any evidence of an animal bite, though some with rabies don't remember being bitten by an animal. One of the most recent theories about Poe's death suggests that the author succumbed to a brain tumor, which influenced his behavior before his death. When Poe died, he was buried rather unceremoniously in an unmarked grave in a Baltimore graveyard. 26 years later, a statue was erected honoring Poe near the graveyard's entrance. Poe's coffin was dug up and his remains exhumed in order to be moved to a new place of honor. Poe's coffin fell apart as workers tried to move it. Little remained of Poe's body, but one worker did remark on a strange feature of Poe's skull, a mass rolling around inside. Newspapers of the day claimed that the clump was Poe's brain, shriveled yet intact after almost 3 decades in the ground. We know today that the mass could not have been Poe's brain, which is one of the first parts of the body to decay after death. It could, however, be a brain tumor, which can calcify after death into hard masses. In fact, it's said that a New York physician once told Poe that he had a lesion on his brain that may have caused his adverse reactions to alcohol. Perhaps the least sinister theory suggests that Poe merely succumbed to the flu, which might have turned into deadly pneumonia on his deathbed. In the days leading up to Poe's departure from Richmond, the author visited a physician complaining of illness. His last night in town he was very sick, and his soon-to-be wife noted that he had a weak pulse, a fever, and she didn't think he should take the journey to Philadelphia. The doctor also told him not to travel as he was too sick. It was raining in Baltimore when Poe was there, which could account for Poe being found in clothes that were not his. The cold and rain may have exasperated the flu Poe already had, and maybe that led to pneumonia. The high fever may account for his hallucinations and confusion. The final theory I'll include here is that Poe may have been murdered by the brothers of his wealthy fiancée, Elmira Shelton, just because it makes for an interesting story. Author John Evangelist Walsh, using evidence from newspapers, letters, and memoirs, argues that Poe actually made it to Philadelphia, where he was ambushed by Shelton's 3 brothers who warned Poe against marrying their sister. Frightened by the experience, Poe disguised himself in unfamiliar clothes and hid in Philadelphia for nearly a week before heading back to Richmond to marry Shelton. Walsh theorizes that Shelton's brothers intercepted Poe in Baltimore, beat him, and forced him to drink whiskey, which they knew would send Poe into a deathly sickness. The theory hasn't been very widely accepted. You can read more about it in Walsh's book, Midnight Dreary: The Mysterious Death of Edgar Allan Poe. The debate rages on to this day, with other theories pertaining to syphilis, cholera, diabetes, epilepsy, tuberculosis, and a heart problem. Poe's final breath was the birth of his last and possibly greatest mystery, one that may never be solved. Poe's funeral was attended by only 7 people, and I can't help but wonder what he'd make of his popularity today. Rufus Wilmot Griswold, a literary critic and longtime enemy of Poe's, wrote the New York Tribune's obituary of the writer under the pen name Ludwig. In a harsh remembrance that was picked up by papers around the country, Griswold wrote, "Edgar Allan Poe is dead. This announcement will startle many, but few will be grieved by it. The poet was known, personally or by reputation, in all this country, but he had few or no friends, and the regrets of his death will be suggested principally by the consideration that in him literary art has lost one of its most brilliant but erratic stars." Much of what we know about the life, death, and character of Edgar Allan Poe comes from the clearly biased recollections and opinions of people like Rufus Wilmot Griswold, who certainly controlled the public narrative after Poe's untimely demise. Even Poe's final attending physician, Dr. Morin, said to have been a failed fiction writer, gives conflicting accounts of his patient's last days, and basically went on his own publicity tour. It's thought that even his accounts of Poe's calling out the name Reynolds at the end may have been a complete fabrication, further adding to the mystery. That's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this story and will come back for more. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and bring your friends, family, COVID pod, cult members, invisible friends, or enemies. And if you have your own theory about Poe's mysterious death, let us know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.